Winter was the ultimate test of intelligence. When the snows fell thick and the rivers froze solid, survival wasn't about strength, it was about preparation. For countless Native American communities across North America, the ability to endure months of hunger, darkness, and ice came down to one thing: storage. Forget modern refrigerators, freezers, and canned goods. Long before electricity ever hummed, Indigenous engineers had already mastered the art of preservation, blending science, ecology, and spiritual wisdom into systems so effective, some remain functional today. They didn't just stockpile food, they built living relationships with the land that provided it.
Imagine walking through a Great Plains camp in late autumn. Meat racks still smoking, berries laid out to dry, hides stretched over wooden frames. Beneath the ground, hidden from view, cache pits and root cellars kept corn, seeds, and pemmican cold and safe. Above, granaries perched on stilts rose like sentinels against snow and mice alike. Every detail, from depth to airflow, was tested by centuries of experience. These weren't random inventions. They were data-driven designs born from observation and necessity. Tribes of the Arctic knew how to harness permafrost. Forest peoples mastered humidity control through bark linings. Desert nations learned how to seal food in clay to preserve it through drought. This was architecture and biology working as one. Innovation disguised as instinct. And here's what modern science rarely admits. Many of these methods rival and even outperform today's green storage technologies. Because what the native peoples built wasn't mechanical. It was sustainable, cyclical, and alive. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, because every week we uncover another forgotten breakthrough. Proof that ancient engineering didn't vanish. It was simply buried beneath time and arrogance. So step beyond the teepee. This is the untold story of how Indigenous genius conquered winter itself, and how its lessons may yet help us survive the future. Before the first snow touched the ground, Native American communities were already months ahead of the season. Winter wasn't a surprise. It was an event they studied, tracked, and prepared for with almost scientific precision. Survival meant more than endurance. It meant mastery of time, harvest, and environment. Across the continent, every region faced a different challenge. On the Great Plains, temperatures could plunge so low that food froze solid overnight. In the Arctic, light itself vanished for weeks. In the forests of the Northeast, humidity could rot entire stores of grain if improperly sealed. Yet, from Alaska to the Carolinas, every nation had a plan. One that transformed scarcity into stability. Preparation began long before the cold arrived. As early autumn settled in, hunting intensified, and crops were dried, smoked, or cached underground. Villages worked together to preserve not only food, but the community's rhythm. Elders knew exactly how much meat, corn, and root vegetables were needed per family. Every household contributed to a shared supply, because survival was never an individual act. It was collective engineering. What makes these systems extraordinary isn't just their effectiveness, it's how deeply they mirrored the environment's own cycles. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was over-harvested. Food storage wasn't about hoarding, it was about harmony. Every grain sealed underground, every berry dried by the sun, represented a promise that spring would find the people strong enough to greet it. Modern technology may have replaced smokehouses and cache pits with steel and plastic, but the principle remains timeless. Prepare with respect, consume with awareness, and build with balance. Because the wisdom of winter wasn't about surviving nature, it was about surviving with it. When the world above froze, the earth below became a refuge.
Native American communities across the continent discovered that survival could be buried, quite literally, beneath their feet. They mastered a form of natural refrigeration long before the term existed: cache pits and root cellars, the original cold storage. These underground chambers used the planet's own stable temperatures to keep food fresh for months. In the icy north, permafrost acted like a freezer. In the temperate plains, deeper pits stayed cool and humid. And in the desert, carefully shaded cellars prevented spoilage through insulation rather than ice. It was science in perfect sync with soil. Each region adapted its technique. The Plains tribes dug deep, narrow cache pits lined with grass, bark, or woven mats to absorb moisture and repel pests. In the northeast, the Iroquois and Algonquin stored corn, beans, and squash in earthen chambers, sealed with clay and covered by mounded soil. Farther west, tribes like the Mandan and Hidatsa built large subterranean storage rooms beneath their lodges, enough to feed entire families through the harshest Dakota winters. These pits weren't just for food. They safeguarded tools, seeds, and sacred items, anything that needed protection from frost or flood. Each was marked and remembered, passed down through generations as part of a family's geography. What makes these systems extraordinary is their sustainability. They required no fuel, no machinery, only respect for the natural balance of temperature, moisture, and air. Even modern preppers and off-grid engineers now replicate these designs, unknowingly echoing wisdom thousands of years old. To the native peoples, the earth wasn't just ground to walk on. It was a living partner, a cold and patient guardian that held their survival in silence until spring returned. Long before freezers and preservatives, Native American communities turned the raw elements, smoke, sunlight, and salt, into their own chemistry of survival. These techniques transformed perishables, like meat, fish, and fruit, into foods that could last entire seasons, ensuring that hunger never followed the frost. Smoke was more than a byproduct of fire. It was a preservative and purifier. Over slow-burning coals, strips of buffalo, venison, or salmon were hung inside smoke lodges for days. The cool smoke infused every fiber with antimicrobial compounds that prevented decay, while the process drove out moisture. The result was lightweight, long-lasting, nutrient-rich meat that could survive the cold and travel long distances. From this practice came one of the greatest survival foods ever created: pemmican. A perfect blend of dried meat, rendered fat, and sometimes berries, pemmican could last for years without spoiling. It fueled hunters, travelers, and even entire expeditions across frozen lands. A high-protein, high-energy miracle crafted by indigenous hands. Meanwhile, the sun became a quiet collaborator. In the arid Southwest, Pueblo and Navajo communities dried fruits, herbs, and vegetables on raised racks, letting wind and heat preserve flavor and vitamins without fire. Salt, traded widely between tribes, served as another natural defense against spoilage, used sparingly to draw moisture from fish and game before drying. These methods weren't random tricks. They were science, guided by observation. Each technique balanced nutrition, texture, and preservation with perfect precision. The people knew which wood created the cleanest smoke, which winds dried food fastest, and how humidity affected each harvest. Their genius was simplicity, transforming the forces of nature into preservation partners. And in doing so, they discovered something even modern survivalists still chase: perfection without waste. While some tribes looked to the earth for protection, others turned their gaze upward, building granaries and drying racks that stood like wooden sentinels against snow, rain, and hungry animals. These elevated storage systems were marvels of design, simple in appearance, but ingenious in how they used air, height, and balance to safeguard an entire season's survival. In the Great Plains,
Granaries were often raised several feet off the ground on sturdy posts, each post capped with a smooth, round stone to stop rodents from climbing. The walls were made of woven reeds, willow branches, or bark panels, materials that allowed constant airflow while shielding the contents from direct moisture. Inside, corn, beans, and dried squash were layered with grasses or bark to prevent mold. This natural ventilation system kept everything cool, dry, and pest-free. No metal, no chemicals, just pure environmental harmony. Farther south and west, Pueblo and Hopi communities used clay and adobe to create enclosed storage rooms, each engineered to resist temperature swings and sandstorms. In humid forests, tribes like the Cherokee and Creek hung drying racks high in tree canopies, taking advantage of steady breezes to cure fish, herbs, and wild fruits. But these elevated structures weren't only practical. They were communal. Building and filling them required cooperation and trust. A single granary might store enough food to feed multiple families through the winter, symbolizing unity and responsibility. The success of one was the safety of all. Even today, similar principles echo in modern agriculture, from ventilated barns to silo systems. The physics are the same: air circulation, moisture control, and elevation. Yet these timeless designs were perfected by indigenous engineers centuries before blueprints ever existed. They didn't just build storage, they built resilience. Winter storage was never just about food. It was about preserving life in every form. Alongside dried meats and corn, Native American communities stored seeds, tools, medicines, and even memories. Each cache pit, basket, or clay vessel was a capsule of survival, ensuring that not only the body, but the culture itself endured through the cold months ahead. Seeds were sacred. They weren't simply crops for the next season. They were promises. Carefully selected from the strongest plants, they were dried, wrapped in bark or hide, and buried in cool, dry spaces. The Iroquois Confederacy's three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, were often sealed together, symbolizing balance and interdependence even in storage. Farther west, the Hopi and Mandan kept intricate seed libraries, maintaining dozens of varieties adapted to drought, frost, or poor soil. A genetic legacy of ecological genius. Tools, too, were prepared for the long sleep of winter. Stone blades, sinew cords, bone needles, and fishing hooks were stored with care to prevent rust, rot, or warping. Everything had its place, its season, and its story. These items were often passed from parent to child, a tangible thread connecting generations through craft and survival. Medicinal herbs, sage, yarrow, willow bark, cedar, were dried and kept in hide pouches. In harsh winters, they became the community's pharmacy, treating fever, wounds, and fatigue when the earth was silent. And then there was knowledge. Each stored object carried a memory, a hunting trail, a planting pattern, a family recipe. Preservation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. In every seed and tool, they stored their identity, ensuring that when spring returned, the people didn't just survive, they continued. In Native American life, survival was never an individual pursuit. It was a collective promise. Winter preparation was an act of unity, a season when entire villages moved as one living organism. Every hand, from the smallest child to the oldest elder, played a role in ensuring that when the snow came, no one would face it alone. Food storage and preservation were organized through shared labor and shared purpose. Hunters brought in meat, gatherers collected wild plants, and farmers harvested the last ears of corn before frost. Women often led the preservation process, transforming raw harvests into dried goods, smoked meats, or stored seeds. Elders, The keepers of seasonal wisdom determined how much was enough, not through guesswork, but through generations of observation and experience. Communal storage sites, large granaries, cache pits, or smokehouses became symbols of trust. Each family contributed according to their means, and in return, all benefited equally. The guiding principle was balance. Take what you need, give what you can, and protect what sustains everyone. This was not charity, it was survival ethics. Winter was also when storytelling, craft-making, and teaching thrived. Around fires and within lodges, communities repaired tools, wove clothing, and passed on the knowledge that would guide the next generation's survival. Cooperation wasn't just about food. It was about identity, discipline, and connection. Even in times of scarcity, generosity defined them. Sharing a final store of dried meat or seeds wasn't seen as loss. It was renewal, a reaffirmation that life itself depended on unity. To survive the coldest months, the people didn't just build storage. They built community. Because in their world, the strongest structure wasn't made of wood or clay. It was made of trust. From the frozen north to the arid southwest, Native American winter storage systems were masterpieces of environmental engineering, each one custom-built for its landscape. Rather than forcing nature to obey, they learned how to let the elements do the work for them. In the Arctic, Inuit and Yupik peoples used permafrost as a natural freezer. They carved storage pits directly into the frozen ground or beneath snow-packed shelters, keeping fish and seal meat preserved for months without rot. The Earth's chill did what no machine could: maintain perfect, stable cold. Farther south, the Plains tribes faced the opposite problem: fluctuating temperatures and dry winds. Their cache pits were lined with grasses and bark to balance humidity, preventing food from freezing too hard or drying out completely. The Hidatsa and Mandan built dome-roofed underground chambers, vented through narrow shafts that controlled airflow, a prehistoric version of climate control. In the southwest, where heat and drought ruled, storage demanded insulation from the sun. Pueblo and Hopi builders created adobe storage rooms with thick walls that stayed cool by day and warm by night. Clay pots sealed with mud and ash preserved grains, dried corn, and even water, their porosity allowing slow evaporation that naturally regulated temperature. Even in the forests of the Northeast, moisture was the enemy. There, tribes built raised bark huts or bark-lined caches with precise ventilation slits, not to cool the contents, but to breathe with the forest, keeping humidity in balance. Every region was a classroom, every tribe an engineer. They didn't need blueprints or thermometers. They had centuries of data stored in observation, passed down through memory. Their secret wasn't control, it was collaboration. An alliance with nature so perfect, even modern design still struggles to match it. To keep food alive through the dead of winter, Native American engineers didn't rely on luck. They relied on balance. Every storage system, from an underground cache to a high granary, followed the same invisible formula: control the temperature, regulate the airflow, and manage the moisture. Miss one element, and the entire season's work could rot away before the thaw. Temperature came first. Underground cellars stayed close to the Earth's natural 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit range, cold enough to slow decay, but warm enough to prevent freezing. In the northern tundra, frozen pits preserved meat solid for months. In warmer regions, ventilation shafts released trapped heat, keeping stores cool even when snow melted. Airflow was next, the breath of the system. Too much air and food dried or spoiled. Too little and mold or gas built up. Tribes designed clever ventilation techniques without a single nail or tool. Tiny reed tubes, gaps between bark linings, or angled vents allowed gentle air exchange, preventing stagnation while maintaining constant humidity. And then, moisture, the hardest element to tame. The solution? Nature itself. Bark, grass, and clay worked as natural regulators. They absorbed excess water during wet periods and released it during dry ones. Some caches even used alternating layers, bark, sand, leaves, to create an early form of vapor barrier insulation. Together, these systems achieved what modern science now calls passive preservation, temperature and humidity control powered entirely by the earth. The results were astonishing. Grains stayed edible for years, seeds remained viable for planting, and meat preserved without salt or refrigeration. What the world calls primitive was, in truth, precision engineering. Their survival wasn't luck or faith. It was physics, learned by listening to the wind and the ground itself. In an age of overconsumption and waste, the winter storage systems of Native American cultures feel less like ancient history and more like a roadmap for the future. Their methods were not only effective, they were sustainable, closed-loop systems that left no scars on the land. Every resource used had a purpose, and every cycle ended where it began, in balance with nature. Modern sustainability movements now echo the very principles Indigenous peoples lived by for centuries. Concepts like passive cooling, zero-waste food systems, and local sourcing are not new inventions. They're rediscoveries. The cache pit was the first off-grid refrigerator. The smokehouse, the first renewable dryer. The granary, the first community pantry. And every one of them worked without electricity, fuel, or industrial pollution. But perhaps the greatest lesson isn't about technique, it's about mindset. Native Americans didn't see the environment as a warehouse of resources. They saw it as a relationship. Each harvest was an exchange, not a conquest. You took only what you could protect, because wasting food was not just impractical, it was disrespectful. In a world now battling climate change, overfarming, and energy crises, these ancestral systems offer more than nostalgia. They offer blueprints. Modern architects, agriculturalists, and engineers are once again studying how natural materials regulate temperature and how ancient food preservation outlasts modern packaging. The wisdom that once kept villages alive through snow and famine now guides communities seeking to live lightly on the earth once more. The old ways were never primitive. They were precise. They remind us that sustainability isn't innovation. It's remembering. Behind every cache pit, granary, or smokehouse was more than practicality. There was reverence. To Native American communities, storing food for winter wasn't simply preparation. It was a spiritual covenant with the earth. Preservation meant gratitude. Every kernel of corn, every dried berry, every strip of smoked meat represented a gift from the land. And gifts were never taken for granted. Harvest seasons began and ended with ceremony. Tribes offered prayers or symbolic portions of the first harvest back to the soil, rivers, or sky, returning energy to the source before taking for themselves. This wasn't ritual for show. It was the foundation of ecological balance. If the land provided, it was the people's duty to care for it, to make sure that abundance never turned to greed. Even storage itself carried spiritual design. Cache pits were often aligned with the cardinal directions, reflecting harmony between the elements. Granaries were built near the heart of villages, not hidden away, but visible reminders of unity and gratitude. Elders taught that food stored with respect would last longer, remain pure, and nourish more deeply. This philosophy extended far beyond the harvest. The act of preserving food mirrored the preservation of stories, songs, and identities. Just as corn was dried to feed the next generation, knowledge was passed down to feed the spirit of those yet to come. To live sustainably wasn't a political choice. It was a moral one. The people understood that survival without respect was empty survival. True preservation meant protecting both body and soul. They didn't just store food, they stored balance. And in doing so, they left us a legacy that proves the greatest technology humanity ever created was harmony itself. As the last embers of winter fires fade, one truth still burns bright. Survival was never just about endurance. It was about understanding. The Native American winter storage systems we've explored weren't primitive hacks. They were acts of partnership between human intelligence and the Earth's quiet brilliance. Every cache pit, every rack, every smoked bundle carried a lesson. That the world provides everything we need if we respect the rhythm it moves by. The people who lived through those frozen months didn't fight nature. They listened to it, and in doing so, built solutions that outlasted empires. Today, as we face climate instability, food insecurity, and environmental exhaustion, their wisdom feels less like the past and more like prophecy. We spend fortunes trying to recreate what they already mastered, self-regulating systems powered by nothing but soil, air, and awareness.